Hi, and welcome to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm your host, Ray Treverson from OTG Capital. Always a pleasure to have your company. We welcome back to the microphone again this week Justin Bott, Media Information Officer from Services Australia. You may know them as Centrelink, but it is Services Australia. And one of the interesting things that, ladies and gents, we see a lot of discussion because of the housing crisis that we are all going through in this country, not just here, but even across the ditch in New Zealand. It's tough to buy a house there. And so, Justin, I've asked you to come on the show today to talk about the kind of things that parents can do to help kids. Now, I can remember very famously, probably about 10 years ago now, a former prime minister said, "Yeah, sure, just help your kids out, bank of mum and dad." He forgot to mention the fact that he was a prime minister that had a net worth of $400 million, and that buying his daughter an apartment in Rose Bay for $2.5 million really wasn't a stretch. The rest of us have to live in the real world. And so, we are going to talk today with Justin about some of the very practical ways which mum and dad can help out. Now, I guess one of the things, if you're in the fortunate position of being able to own your own home, it's not uncommon for you to look to help out. And hey, my mum and dad helped me when I was buying my very first apartment when I was 27 years old. They helped me out because my word, getting a home loan back in the mid to late 80s was darn hard, and I had help from Defence Service home loans, etc. So look, we welcome Justin Bott. So again, welcome back, Justin.
You?
So you've got a very good set of questions here, which I'm going to rattle through. So first one is we're going to talk a little bit about definitions. So what does it mean when I say I'm going to go guarantor for the kids?
Yeah, so the big issue about using the home, that's really what we're going to look at. How can I use the home to help the kids get a home of their own is the basic premise behind these different tools that you could use. So again, that's all of this is things that you are legally able to do, but there's always going to be that side issue. If I'm a customer of Services Australia, does this action have an implication for my payments, which is really important? I might be able to help out the kids, but if I wipes my eligibility for payments, then that's obviously something we're going to have to work through. So the first one we're going to look at is this idea of going guarantor. Now, when you go guarantor, that is generally because the kids may not have enough in the way of securities to support a loan. So they need some form of property. The banks need some form of property to be security. If the kids default, they can call on the property in order to do that. Now, I, as an owner of the property, can choose to go guarantor for the third party, in this case for the kids. And what that means is that I'm actually putting my home up as security for their loan. There are no obligations for me at the beginning to make any payments. That's their responsibility. I don't have to do anything in the way of servicing the loan, but I have to make sure that my home is there as security for the loan. Now, for Services Australia's perspective, doing that is fine. It's not a problem. I can go guarantor. I can put my home up as guarantor in the kids' loan. Won't affect my eligibility for payments at all. And if the kids make all the repayments and everything goes smooth and the way we all want it to go, then it will never be a problem for Services Australia. I will never have an issue with it, and everything will go perfectly smoothly. The problem from us comes when things don't go perfectly smoothly, when the kids don't make repayments.
Isn't that always the case? Everything's fine until it's not.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And hopefully this is not something you'll ever have to go through, but it is, I should say, this is something that you should be thinking about. And it's not hard to come up with scenarios where that might be different. Kids separate, kids have a divorce. What does that mean for me going guarantor on this loan? So the problem with Services Australia is that when the kids cease making repayments on the loan, those repayments are still expected. And the person who's now expected to make those repayments is the person who's put their home on the line as security for that loan, and that's
guarantor.
You, the guarantor. So you as the guarantor are now expected to either make repayments on the loan or fully pay it off. Now, from a Services Australia's perspective, that means that you are actually gifting the kids the money. You are making payments for somebody else's benefit, but no particular benefit or no direct benefit to yourself. So every time you make a repayment on that loan where the kids have defaulted, that's a gift.
Even if the money's paid back, though, what if the kids decide, let's say it's temporary only, and they can make it back up. Is that still considered gifting, or is it just
Gifts.
a temporary loan?
It's a really good question, and we'll ask me that question in a sec because it's a really
Okay,
good one.
sorry.
The difference between a gift and a loan is really important. From a gift's perspective, it is a gift, but gifts can be returned. So if I have paid that money on behalf of the children, unless I've come up with some sort of loan arrangement with them where I'm going to do that, realistically, I haven't done that. It's just a gift because I'm just doing my obligations. If the kids do then come up with the money and then repay me, then the gift has been returned, which means it doesn't count any longer. It disappears off the record. So the big issue with going guarantor is, first of all, there's that one. The second big issue is when I talk about these sorts of things, all of these sorts of things, there is no getting away with. These are major financial decisions. Every single one of the things we're going to talk about are huge financial decisions, potentially bigger than you have even thought about. Not just an issue of what if the kids fully default, I now have to sell my house to pay their loan. So not only am I dealing with the financial implications of that and just where do I live, but the relationship side of a lot of this stuff can be really unfortunate as well. How is Christmas going to look
Wow.
if we're both now at the parental accommodation because the kids have made me have to sell my own because I've gone guarantor? So from a Services Australia's perspective, everything works fine, no impact on your eligibility. When they default, if you make any repayments, those repayments are gifts. If you have to sell the property in order to pay off the loan, then that lump sum is a gift and it will affect your eligibility. So, yeah, there's certainly a problem from that perspective.
I guess it's a fascinating thing. I'd like to get maybe a sense of numbers, because we don't suffer from a lot of mortgage default in this country because we have full recourse borrowing. Again, I want to talk about this definitionally, because people keep on referring back to the mortgage crisis of America, where people just ditch their keys and put it in a box to the bank and just walked away. You can't do that here in Australia because we have what's called full recourse borrowing. The bank has you on the hook. Okay, so if a mum and dad goes guarantor, that, like you say, is equivalent to a mortgage that they were paying off themselves for 20, 30, 40 years themselves before their kids came along and then potentially lumbered another mortgage on them. And so it has the equal weighting of the law as if they were taking the loan out themselves. And so, I think you're making some really valid points. Now, normally, the default rate in this country usually hovers between about 0.8% to 1%. It's considered to be really high if it gets above that. Are they the kind of numbers that you are seeing in Services Australia, or you're not exposed to that?
I wouldn't be able to tell you. And the thing with the guarantor is that when it works, we don't even know about it because
And
we don't
ain't
need to
that
know.
the best way? And
Yeah.
ain't that the best way? We hope that the guarantor happens, the kids ride off into the sunset, they've got the security they need, and everyone's happy as Larry. It's a good
Now,
thing.
let me take this opportunity to just talk about the gift and loan concepts because all of these are
Yes.
really going to be going through. So, from Services Australia's perspective, we do treat gifting money to children different to lending money or children to anybody. It doesn't
Mm.
really matter who it is. So, gifting, what we have first of all is that there's an amount of money that you are actually able to give where it won't affect your eligibility. So, I should say, when everybody talks about gifting, the first thing that they come up to me and say is, "What am I allowed to give?" And the answer is you are actually allowed to give anything you want. There are no rules in Australia that stops you from giving. There's nothing from the Australian Taxation Office and there's nothing from Services Australia. If you want to give everything away, you are absolutely within your rights to give everything away. Just don't expect to be able to get full rate of pension as a result of doing that.
Ah,
So
okay.
the issue is not that I'm not am or aren't allowed to give. It's what will Services Australia recognise that I basically don't have anymore. So when I'm giving money away, we have these things called the gifting free area. And whether you're a single person or a member of a couple, it's exactly the same. It's $10,000 in any single financial year, but no more than $30,000 over any rolling 5-year period. Anything that I give over those amounts, Services Australia will actually pretend I've still got. And what we'll do is we're going to put it into the equivalent of a bank account. So it's a
Right.
deemed financial asset, same as if you did have the money sitting in term deposit. We're going to put that money sitting in that pretend financial asset, and it sits there for
Ah.
5 years. So the
Okay.
gift will affect me for 5 years. On the 5th year and 1 day, the gift will disappear, will no longer count towards your record, won't account towards your eligibility. And that also includes gifts that are made up to 5 years before you apply for the pension. So if age pension age is 67, then any gifts that I have made from 62 are going to be counted within that period of time. Again, with the whole premise of the government basically doesn't want people to try and hand their assets over to somebody else and then rock up and they pay me the full pension because I don't have anything, because I've deprived myself of the benefit of assets in order to try and get a higher rate pension. We're not a fan of that. So we want to
So
make
that's
sure that
why it's there. So
if
that's
it's
why
your
it's
money,
there.
that it stays as your money. That's right. So gifting, you've got these deduction amounts, $10,000 in a single financial year, no more than $30,000 over a rolling 5-year period. The excess stays on your record and disappears after 5 years. Loans are very different beasts. So what we're talking about here is when you lend money to somebody else. So I'm going to help the kids with a deposit. There's $100,000, but I expect the kids to pay me that $100,000 back. It's an expectation. Works well with my estate. If I pass away, my estate can then get the money back. There's a loan agreement. It all works well with that. The problem it comes to, if you like, is from Services Australia. Now, with Services Australia, if you lend money to anybody, then the whole amount is counted as a financial asset. There's no deduction amounts. There's no free areas. The whole amount. If I lend $100,000, then it's a $100,000 asset. If I give $100,000, it's a $90,000 asset because I'm allowed the $10,000. With a loan, that doesn't count. So the loan is the full amount, and the loan stays on your record until the loan is repaid
Paid.
or forgiven. Now, the thing about that is that if, in 15 years I finally work out that my daughter is never going to pay me the $100,000 back, and I just give up on it, and I give up on the loan and I forgive it, it then becomes a gift.
I was going to
So
say,
it's
it
been a
must
loan for
transfer
15
sooner
years,
or later.
becomes a gift now. We take off the $10,000, but it's now going to sit on your record for another 5 years before eventually it will cease to be counted. So with gifts, they have that limited time frame. With loans, they go for life. But with loans, you've got the benefit of being able to use that as part of your estate planning mechanism. I've got multiple children. I help one child out. It's very easy with my will to say, here is a loan for the money that I've lent them, so that can be offset and as part of the estate planning procedures. That's much trickier with gifts. Now, I gifted this money to some children a couple of years ago. Well, when I pass away, that's theoretically irrelevant. I should be looking at what assets I have and distributing it. So loans are easier for estate planning, but don't necessarily work as well when it comes to Services Australia.
Wow. Okay, look, we're at about half time for our radio show, Justin. You're here on Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm your host, Ray Trevisan, and I'm here at the microphone with Justin Bott, Media Information Officer from Services Australia. We're going to go for a short break, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Hi, and thank you for listening to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly radio program about finance, money, and investing on Radio Northern Beaches and nationally on the Community Radio Network around Australia. The views, comments, and opinions aired during our program should not be construed or viewed as financial advice. Any commentary is general advice only and does not take into account your objectives, financial situation, or needs. You should consider whether the advice is suitable for you and your personal circumstances. If in doubt, you should contact an authorised licensed financial planner. We welcome questions and feedback, and you can get in touch with us via our blog, social media channels, or email. Please search for Dollars and Making Sense in your favourite podcast platform or check out our blog at otgcapital.com.au/blog.
Hi, and welcome back to Dollars and Making Sense, a weekly show about finance, money, and investing. I'm your host, Ray Trevisan, and at the microphone, I'm really pleased to welcome back Justin Bott, who is the Media Information Officer from Services Australia. You may know them as Centrelink as well. Now, today we're talking about the bank of mum and dad and how mum and dads who own a home can help their kids out into the big greasy pole of home ownership themselves. Now, before we went to the break, Justin, we were talking about the difference between gifting and a loan. And this horrible moment when you, as a parent, owned this money and then you finally realize I'm never going to get it back. But let's say we use this example of 15 years before we enter the break. Can you go back to Services Australia and say, listen, it's been going for 15 years. Can I gift it 10? Can I write it off 5 years ago? Or do you actually have to start the clock from when you tell them?
Start the clock from when you've actually written it off, which is when you tell them.
Ooh.
So that would be that moment. Up until
And
if
then
there's an
5 years after that.
this idea, it's really, I mean, there may be a loan document, and a lot of cases we do recommend you get a proper loan document, again, for estate planning and all that sort of thing. But there's this expectation of repayment. If I expect the money to be returned, then I have lent that money to somebody. With a gift, it's gone, it's not under my control, it's their money and they can do whatever they like with it. So I expect nothing back from a gift. So it's the basic premise. So if there's an expectation of the money coming back until such time as that keeps going, that is a loan. When you give it up, all right, now I have finally officially given up any rights to that money to be returned. That makes it a gift at that point.
Yeah. Okay, so you've written here in the notes that I've read pre-show. What are the implications that you get if you're trying to get your kids on your own title? So you hold the deeds to your own home, but part of your transition is about getting your kids on title. Is that a good idea from a Centrelink perspective?
We're not a fan of saying whether something is a good idea or not a good idea. It's
My
about
apologies.
no, that's okay. It's all about just making sure that you got the information before you decide, because there's going to be advantages and disadvantages. Basic premise is that if I put my children, there's a couple of issues. So first of all, not Services Australia, but let's just talk about governments. If I decide to put my kid's name on the title deed so that they've got some property in their name that a bank's going to again go, all right, you own a part of a property, therefore we're happy to lend you the money. The first thing is that's a stamp duty effect. So straight away, I'm looking at stamp duty. And whether I'm giving the kids 5% of my title deeds or 100% of my title deeds, when it comes to stamp duty, they're going to look at the entire value of the property and they're going to say, well, this is the amount of stamp duty you would have to pay regardless of the size of the change of title deed. So there's a big cost. But it's certainly depending on how much your place is worth and where you live, that's a big cost that you're going to have to deal with. Somebody's going to pay that money straight up. So that's the first issue. Second issue is that you have actually now, again, given what we would have called a non-assessable asset for the family home. You've made it a gift. So you've created a brand new asset. When we're talking about lending or loaning or giving money to the kids beforehand, that was really probably money that we already had. Money sitting in the bank account, money sitting in investments that we then handed over to the kids. So it was already counted beforehand, and we're counting it again. In this case, when I am giving the kids proportion of the home, the value of the amount of the value, the value of the home that's now been given in the kid's name, that's the value of the gift. And that's a new asset added to the rest of my other financial assets, and again, going to sit on my record for 5 years. So if I only give them 5%, then 5% of the value of the home is now, and market value we're talking about, 5% of the market value of the home is now a gift added to the rest of my financial assets and can have an impact. It's a bit different, though, if you give them 100%. Now, if I just give the kids 100% of the value of the home and that's it, then yes, I've given the kids 100%, massive asset. I probably, certainly, living where we live on the northern beaches of Sydney, I have lost my pension eligibility because I've created a brand new asset worth 1 point whatever million. I can't get paid a pension with that at the same time. Pension's gone. The one circumstance where that doesn't count is what we call a granny flat arrangement. Now, a granny flat arrangement, it's not, what we're not talking about is, the self-contained flat sitting in the backyard where most people think of a granny flat. A granny flat arrangement happens when somebody hands over an asset, whether it be cash, whether it be the family home, whether it be something else. They hand over assets to a third party, and that third party then guarantees or promises you somewhere for you to live for the rest of your life. Now, often there is a limit for that. So if I'm doing cash, for example, there is what we call a reasonable transfer. I'm going to get value for money. So it's not reasonable for a 92-year-old to give her daughter $2 million to live with her for the rest of life. She's not going to get $2 million worth of value out of that. So it's a gift is going to happen in there. It's an excess amount. There'll be a gift. That reasonable concept does not apply when I transfer 100% of the value of the home to the kids. So if I use all of my home, and it can only be for all of my home, it doesn't work for 95%, it's got to be 100%. So if I use all of my property to create a granny flat arrangement with the kids where I give them the property and they promise me somewhere to live, that place may be in my home. That place might be somewhere else altogether, but they promise me somewhere to live for the rest of my life. Then we don't count the value of the home as a gift. We don't treat it that way. We say, all right, there's that exchange. You have got something, you've got somewhere to live, they've got an asset to pay for that. Now, as you can imagine, that's all well and good for Services Australia, but that's massive implications for estate planning and lots of other kids and all that sort of stuff.
Wow.
So, I've got 3 children and I give one of them the house to give me somewhere to live and nothing for the rest. That's not going to go down too well for my estate. So these are why I say that you got to look at the whole picture. There's no point just looking at what does Services Australia do if I've destroyed my family as a consequence. Yes, I kept my pension for the rest of my life, but now my kids aren't speaking to each other and none of them are speaking to me. That's not a good place to be. So from those sorts of issues, if you are looking at doing anything like that, then I really recommend you give us a call and speak to the Financial Information Service. So ring us on 132300. Say financial information when they ask for the reason for your call. And do this before you've done anything. Like you just start to think about it.
Couldn't agree
give us a
more.
call.
Couldn't
if you've
agree
already
more.
changed the title deeds, then it's done. It's a done deal and there's nothing we can do about it. So have a chat with us beforehand. Talk through the implications. They're not just going to talk about what does it mean for your payment. They're going to talk about what does it mean for your will? What does it mean for your estate planning? What does it mean for your relationship? What does it mean if, the big issues that people bring up, what does it mean if the kids divorce in 3 years' time?
Yeah.
And you put the property in both of their names? And where do we go from there? So there's all these sorts of big issues coming through. I really recommend you speak to somebody. Certainly talk to your professionals, your legal professionals, your accountants, financial planners, but also give the Financial Information Service a call so we can talk and give you the information that you need to make the decisions you need to make.
I mean, I will have on the show soon Andrew Inwood, who's the CEO of Core Data, and he presents information about a $5 trillion transfer of wealth between the baby boomers and the generation coming through. And the magnitude of these changes, Justin, cannot be understated, because what you're talking about is not going to be a one-off. That's going to be happening so often, because it's not just the Sydney's northern beaches. I mean, hey, I love the area where I live, and yes, our houses do cost, but houses cost even out in the west or even in the southwest of Sydney. They cost in Canberra. I mean, Canberra's very pricey town these days, as is Melbourne, as is Brisbane. And so the family home, particularly an unencumbered family home, all of a sudden is the prize jewel in any estate. And we've had estate planners on our show before. They've told some of the most eye-curling stories about what happens when mum and dad depart the mortal coil, and then you've got multiple siblings and then blended families involved. It's like, oh my word, it is really quite something. We could do another show and well and truly, but let's keep moving on, because you've got some other really fascinating terms that I want to raise with you, and the impact of the use of these within a Services Australia context. Reverse mortgages. Tell me a bit about those.
So reverse mortgages, they differ from your standard mortgage in the basic underlying concept. And that is, first of all, they're only available for older Australians. This is not something that younger people can do. And the idea behind a reverse mortgage is that you borrow the money through the reverse mortgage, and there's really no expectation that you make any repayments. So what basically happens is that the interest that you are not paying builds and accrues and gathers and gathers and gathers. And as the months and weeks and years go by, then the reverse mortgage just grows and gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually there's going to be an expectation that that mortgage is going to be repaid. Now, that happens when either you sell the underlying asset that you put the reverse mortgage against, and that doesn't even have to happen. You can, with some of them, switch them to the new property, or you pass away, and then it becomes an issue for your estate. Now, practically speaking, what that's going to mean is that more than likely your estate will have to sell the property to pay off the debt. Now, with reverse mortgages, you can get the money in different ways. I will just very quickly say Services Australia has our own version of these. It's called the Home Equity Access Scheme. It's like a reverse mortgage in that you are borrowing against the family home. But what it does is, unlike a reverse mortgage where you can get access to hundreds of thousands of dollars as a lump sum to do with as you will, Services Australia's Home Equity Access Scheme actually can arrange the payments to come as the form of an ongoing fortnightly income. So you can get paid up to 150% of the full rate of pension, whether you're on a pension or not. And that's actually the amount that you're borrowing, and you can choose to take some of it as small lump sums and that sort of thing, but they're only small figures.
No, it's
They're
far
nothing.
more modest in that
Yes,
regard.
it's nothing like the big amounts of money a publicly like a publicly available reverse mortgage would do through an organisation. So with reverse mortgages, you can choose to take them as an ongoing income sort of concept. You can choose to take them little bits and pieces as you need to, or you can choose to take them as a big lump sum. And it's the big lump sum that's actually the biggest problem when it comes to Services Australia.
Oh, yeah.
So we don't actually care that you've taken a reverse mortgage. The action of taking a reverse mortgage is not an issue with us. It's what you've done with the money now that you've got it that we're concerned about. So little sources of income, small money in, small money out. There's no real big changes there. There's the debt is getting bigger, but the debt's in the family home. We don't care about that. It's not going to affect your payments. Again, small, if I take random bits of money every now and then as I need it, so there's a big electricity bill or the car needs to be registered, so I take out some money from a reverse mortgage to pay the debt. It's usually only in the bank account for a couple of days before the credit card's cleared or the bill's paid, and so it's not staying around. It's not going to have a big issue. Taking a large lump sum is another story, because again, what you're doing is you've taken and made a financial asset out of something that was not an accessible asset at all. So if I borrow $200,000 as a reverse mortgage and take it as a lump sum, I now have $200,000 sitting in my bank account where I didn't have that money beforehand, and that is now an accessible asset.
That's going to impact your payments.
Well, it might, but it might not. And the reason that it might not is because normally people that go through a reverse mortgage, they use it because they actually don't have much in the other way of resources. They don't have superannuation funds laying about or other bank accounts. They use it because they've used up their other resources, and this is what they're left with, is how to access capital within the family home. Now, with Services Australia's, the way our income and assets free areas work, you can act as a single person, you can have over $300,000 in assets before your pension starts reducing. So if I take out a reverse mortgage, $200,000, and I don't have anything else, my pension actually won't be changed. I'll still stay the full rate of pension because there's not enough in the way of assets or deemed interest from those assets to actually affect my rate of payment.
So look, we're just about out of time now, Justin. It's amazing how quickly this time goes. Great takeaways, ladies and gents. Please check out our blog. Justin, I'm sorry we're so out of time, but look, thank you very kindly for coming around. We can talk about reverse mortgages a lot more in future programs. Thanks for joining us on Dollars and Making Sense.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.